Ash sat in the darkened room, considering the steps that had put her in this position. A few paces from the door, yes, but before that, playing Alan Wake 2, thinking about Alan Wake 2, and drinking lots of coffee even though it tastes really bad and gives her a weird feeling in her stomach. That's the stuff a grizzled, hard-partying PlayStation Access writer like Ash enjoyed. But there was no escaping that post-coffee belly feeling, no matter how small the sip. Not just in her stomach now, but rising up through her throat, threatening to leap from her lips to freedom in a caffeinated exorcism. Not a feeling, no. This was thicker, more tangible, chunkier. Acid reflux? No. Vomit? Also no. This was the irrepressible surge of a piping hot horror game take looking for freedom. Alan Wake 2 is really good, isn't it? Okay, alright, enough of that. I'm Ash, and I'm here to talk about the revelation that is Alan Wake 2 in as little a spoilery way as possible. Releasing a whopping and spooky 13 years after Alan Wake's debut, this sequel is both a continuation and fresh perspective on our pal Alan's story. Where the original game followed a volatile novelist trapped in a story he doesn't remember writing, Alan Wake 2 looks at the repercussions of the supernatural tangle he found himself in all those years ago. In Alan Wake 2, fiction and reality have become even more of a big, goopy mess. We're back in Bright Falls, but this time our friends at the FBI are in town, with playable hero Saga Anderson investigating a cult on the rise, complete with homemade resurrected corpse monsters running around the place with no clothes on. I guess even cults like to partake in a wholesome evening of arts and crafts, even if that is ramming a light switch in a fella's chest for the hell of it. Maybe keep a closer eye on that knitting group Auntie Mabel keeps going to. This sets the scene for a mind-boggling, dark return to Bright Falls, where everything is the same and everything is different after 13 years away, and the game slowly reveals itself as a horror masterpiece. Honestly, it's kind of terrifying in itself that a game as hyped as this one not only manages to live up to expectation, but to surpass it. It's the perfect melting pot, or should I say cauldron, of monsters, creeping dread, and in-your-face fright, weaving together horror influences and self-referential material into one big nasty tapestry. Or two big nasty tapestries, as the stories of Saga Anderson and Alan Wake intertwine across realities. And it's there that the game digs into its central premise. At its core, Alan Wake has always been a game about uncertainty. In Alan Wake 2, we get to see that through the lens of this constantly shifting state of dual perspective, with FBI agent Saga introduced as a playable protagonist investigating the events that led to Alan's disappearance 13 years ago. Rather than picking between who narrates your story in something like Dishonored 2 though, there are two distinct plot lines that exist simultaneously. Saga's the real-world exploration of small-town Bright Falls as she tries to make sense of the nonsensical. To be fair to her, she does do a cracking job of going with the terrifying flow. Brought to Bright Falls by partner Alex Casey, the pair are tasked with investigating a string of ritual murders tied to the Dark Place, a spooky alternate dimension where fiction and reality become interchangeable. It's here where the story's big bad resides, aptly named the Dark Presence, who wants to break free of its trappings in Bright Falls Cauldron Lake to do all manner of evil business. Alan, stuck in the Dark Place since the end of Alan Wake 1, has managed to control it through writing a manuscript that shapes reality around it, which Saga finds pages of in the real world to aid in her investigation, but comes at the cost of her involvement in his horror story, threatening to write her family out of existence. You still with me here? I'm gonna hope so. Now, stepping away from the story for both spoiler reasons and because my mind can only take so much multiverse rationalizing, Alan Wake 2 revels in this constant tug-of-war between two halves of the same whole, never settling in one long enough to make it feel canon. That's best realised in the investigative tactics both characters can dive into to make sense of the world around them. Saga has her mind place, decked out with the classic corkboard and red string, built to link together environmental clues to create deductions about her cases. This is a slow, methodical process, placing slips of paper on the wall to visualise a case that spreads uninhibitedly out and across her setup. Mirrored in the Dark Place by Alan's writing board where he plans out the scenes of his novel. The difference is that Saga looks inward to try and find answers in her knots of clues, and Alan reflects his answers outwards through the power of the dark place. Where one feels like a relaxing coffee break as you thoughtfully slot clues together in a grim jigsaw, the other is an explosion of violence and horror, an unpredictable bloody makeover that snaps into place each time Alan gets inspiration for his story. The way Alan can rewrite the world around him is a way of making the active part of horror gaming even more inescapable. You are literally crafting the world around you as you search for answers. If you want to solve Remedy's puzzle, you'll have to jump into the gruesome eye of the storm to make sense of it. Literally. And that's not the end of this constant push and pull between dual realities. It's our titular writer and his shadowy double, Mr. Scratch. It's the two protagonists in Alan and Saga. It's our world and the dark place. It's reality and fiction. Hell, it is Alan Wake and Alan Wake 2, if we're going to be meta about it, which only feels fair considering the game itself is so meta it would make Wes Craven shed a tear.
You only have to look at New Nightmare to see the inspiration for a writer that's constructing a story that his characters are living through in real time.
Complete with self-inserts from the director and an otherworldly monster with freaky dream logic powers. I mean, Alex Casey is our prime example if we're talking meta here. He shares the same name as Alan Wake's own hard-boiled fictional detective, the same face as Remedy creative director Sam Lake, and the same voice actor as Max Payne, James McCaffrey. And all this really is just the surface lake to the game's self-referential ocean. The lines between all of these doubled-up concepts are constantly erased and redrawn in Alan Wake 2, transforming it into a kaleidoscope of refracted realities that layer up until we're dealing with a veritable plot onion. And what are we cooking up with this bad boy? Well, literally anything, as the rules of the game go, as long as it's a passionate piece of creative work. Novels, songs, films, poems, drawings, even YouTube scripts, I guess.
Wait. Hang on a second.
She was starting to become aware of the trappings of her story. This was all predetermined, scripted. What could she do but carry on reading? Well, yeah, I am going to carry on reading. But because this took me ages to get onto a page though, not because you told me to, Meta Ash. I mean, who even uses a typewriter now? Anyway, let's get back to how Alan Wake 2 is a horror masterpiece. The inability to settle on what's real and what's fantasy in the game is never more deftly realised than with the switching in and out of live action and gameplay. There's this uncanniness to seeing characters move through mediums that's hard to put words to.
For a weird niche reference in relation to all of this, I used to feel overwhelmingly stressed about Homer in The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 6.
Just bear with me, I'm going to give you some context. He accidentally falls through the time-space continuum and ends up in our world at the end of the episode, while still looking like a 3D cartoon character. There's this fear that's written into him as he walks down a pavement that's played off with humour at discovering an erotic cake shop. Now, Alan does not stumble onto one of those. There's no room for saucy sponges in the dark place. But the game inspires the same gut-churning dread of seeing Homer trepidatiously walking down streets he knows he doesn't belong on. Our characters are split and refracted through gameplay and live action in the same way, ramping the uncanny feeling up to 11 when we see Alan's confused face distort through a TV screen, through a negative filter, or through a rickety old projector that contains his leather pants-clad double.
Hello, Thomas Zane.
There's a part of our primal lizard brain that knows he doesn't belong there, or to an even weirder degree, that makes the gameplay version of these characters the uncanny ones after getting used to seeing live-action actors. There's never a moment to sit and get used to what's happening, as it is a constantly shifting spectacle. And spectacle is where I'd like to bring this to a final point.
Actually, maybe tangent is more appropriate. Meta Ash, you can take this one.
You have just crossed over into Ash's Horror Tangent.
Yes, I am making a horror tangent in a horror video, but that's because I want to talk about a different type of horror. Suck it.
Remedy have always been masters of blurring the line between what's scary and what's funny, and it's a legit tactic for making scenes feel all the more unnerving. Let's take a look around Coffee World for this one. It's an in-joke about Finland being the largest consumers of coffee in the world, complete with brilliant puns and a frankly bonkers premise, whilst also being one of the creepiest locations across the map thanks to the dark influence of an alternate dimension. There's this relationship between horror and comedy there, and at large, that works to deepen the effect of both. Where one builds tension, the other relieves it. both working to evoke a reaction on two ends of the same scale: laughing and screaming. And if you're thinking, Ash, how are laughing and screaming anywhere near the same? Then let me tell you, it is all about your body's uncontrollable response. There's something scary about not being able to stop laughing, right? And something quite funny when you see someone scream at a jump scare they weren't expecting. Remedy have built their entire expanded universe on this relationship, from Alan Wake to Control, with an absurdist sense of humour working overtime on their approach to duality yet again. Without diving too deeply into the frankly sublime musical numbers that are peppered through the game, there's a sequence that embodies that lack of control, that hitched breath before you decide if you're going to laugh or cry, perfectly. And that is what makes Alan Wake 2 even more special as a horror game. And that was Ash's horror tangent. Ooh.
Right, okay, now she's finished.
Okay, that's the end of that tangent, but it's also where I'm going to have to wrap this video up. Alan Wake 2 has just been a joy to play, and its cerebral psychological horror is some of my favourite ever put to screen. I mean, as a fan of the genre, it does feel like the whole that was made for me, you know? From that special blend of A24 influences, Sam Lake himself referenced titles like Hereditary and The Witch, to the Lynchian Twin Peaks vibes that have shaped Alan Wake's story for the past 13 years, to Remedy's own games crossing the threshold to create a trippy multiverse. There's an undeniable pedigree here that works to elevate the game to impressively lofty heights. That there are two sequences that even manage to get close to the ashtray maze in Control is all the proof you need that this is something special. Yep, Alan Wake 2 is a horror masterpiece. And there you have it. Have you played Alan Wake 2 yet? What is your favourite moment? Don't forget to like this video if you've made it to this point, and subscribe for more lovely PlayStation content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
PlayStation